Governor Jerry Brown has been a fixture in state politics for almost 50 years. And while his successor, Gavin Newsom, is also a Democrat, he's also showing that he may have a different agenda. Meanwhile, the California Republican Party is increasingly less competitive statewide. What does all this mean? We'll ask longtime observer of state politics, Dan Walters with CalMatters.
Additional funding for the Maddy report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. From the California channel at the state capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. If you're interested in California politics, our guest Dan Walters of CalMatters needs no introduction. What you may not know, however, is that Dan has been covering California politics for almost 60 years. Long time, Dan.
Yes, it is.
You've seen the entire arc of Governor Brown's governorship, the first and the second. So you're here to share some insights both on that and what's going on with California politics in 2019. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So you got this unique perspective. You had a front row seat to the arc of Jerry Brown's political career. Looking back, how would you summarize his first two terms as governor from 74 to 82?
It was kind of like one long campaign. You think about it, he ran for governor in 74, ran for president in 76, ran for re-election in 78, ran for president again in 80, and ran for the U.S. Senate in 82. So he literally was on a full campaign mode, and it did distract him from being governor. He was only partially engaged, I guess you would say, and you can't really say he had a successful first governorship as governor. He may have done something for other reasons, but as governor, he was fighting with the legislature a lot and not getting very far with them. He came in obviously after Ronald Reagan. It was a big change, and it just never kind of got going.
Well, let me ask you this: style and substance. The first go around, Jerry Brown. How would you describe his style and substance?
Well, his style in the first go around, he was a rock star governor. You know, he was dating Linda Ronstadt. Mm-hmm. He was on all the magazines. The National Press Corps was all enthralled of this fresh young guy on the West Coast. And
I mean, he's very young. What was he, 36 as governor? He started
36, I guess 36 when he was elected.
Incredible when you think about it.
That was the style. It was all kind of a big media event. He was kind of publicity mongering and traveling all over the country and everything, but not much substance, truly. He didn't really accomplish much as governor. He did some kind of symbolic things.
Well, the public employer relations law that he signed was pretty big.
It was, and also the agricultural labor relations bill. That was his first year. Mm-hmm. And after that, started running for president. That was kind of the end of it. And he truly kind of botched a few things, and it worked to his disadvantage, particularly the handling of the big medfly invasion in the early 80s. And it made it that he could not win that Senate seat in 82, and it kind of short-circuited his career. I think that if he hadn't run for president in 80, he might have won that Senate seat in 82, and he could have become a viable presidential candidate. But as he has admitted since, he ran too often and too early. So that was the first term. It was a kind of a big thing, and I think it set the stage for the second stint, Jerry Brown 2.0, because I think he, first of all, despite his protestations to the contrary, he really wanted to clean up his record, have something that put him in the history books other than Governor Moonbeam and Linda Ronstadt's boyfriend, something that might be compared favorably with his father, with whom he had a kind of a strange relationship. And so he came back the second time, I think, to kind of say, as he said one time, I'm trying to make this for a family, I want to get S done.
Stuff.
Stuff, right, stuff done. And he talked about analysis paralysis. He just wanted to do stuff.
How did his style and substance change in the second go-around from 2010 to 18?
Well, he was much more engaged. I think that's the main thing. He really, truly was engaged in governing California, and he faced a big budget crisis, and he dealt with it by raising taxes and having a good economy. He was very lucky in that regard. And he's, other than that, however, and that's still an open book because he may have left a bigger problem for his successor in the terms of the budget. He was willing to settle for kind of half a loaf stuff. A partial school finance reform, a partial pension reform.
Well, politics is the art of compromise. He was moving the ball down the field on some of these issues.
He was moving it, but moving a ball only partway down the field doesn't score your touchdown. And so a lot of his stuff is kind of out there waiting to be seen whether it actually has any kind of long-term effect or not. And of course, his two big pet projects, the twin tunnels and the bullet train, as I call it, the bullet train to nowhere, both have kind of stalled out in many respects, and neither may actually ever come to fruition.
Well, what about things like, well, he dealt some way with the deficit, created a rainy day fund,
Right.
and put some money in there. Mild pension reform, did some work there. School financing reform. You know, there were some things that, criminal justice reform.
Yeah, and again, we'll know whether the book, how well the book weighs out. We'll find out whether the budget's in worse shape or not. We'll find out whether the pension reform, even the most optimistic view of the pension reform, is it's going to have a very little impact on the unfunded pension liabilities of California. Very, very mild impact. And his school reform put a lot of extra money into the school system, directed that money supposedly to help poor and non-English speaking kids, but so far it doesn't seem to be having any effect.
Well, I'm going to read something back to you that you wrote. You said whether
that's always dangerous.
whether Brown's legacy goes farther will depend on whether the other things he championed, such things as school finance plan, criminal justice reforms, bullet train, and the tunnels, ultimately succeed or fall by the wayside. So we're going to talk about those topics in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with California reporter Dan Walters about the big political issues that are going to be front and center in 2019. Some of those issues are going to be the ones left undone by outgoing Governor Jerry Brown. One of the big ones is water. The water project called Twin Tunnels. That proposal, what's happening with the Twin Tunnels? What's its fate? Where's water on the political agenda for 2019?
Oh, well, water's always on the political agenda in California, as we all know, and it goes on year after year after year, mostly unresolved. You know, projects are proposed. I can remember talking to William Gianelli, who was Ronald Reagan's water guy back in the early 1970s, and he was touting the peripheral canal, which is the predecessor to the tunnels. I mean, this goes on forever. It's always on the agenda. It's many moving parts involving the Colorado River, the tunnels, desalination. I mean, there's a lot. Are we
going to see anything this year on that topic, do you think?
Not directly, but indirectly, they're in the process of reallocating the water from the Colorado River right now, and that will trigger other things that are going on. It's going to cause some water shortages in Southern California that they're going to try to make up by bringing more water from Northern California, and that's just why they want the tunnels and, you know, that kind of stuff. So all
water,
this is a kind of a slow motion, it's either a slow motion disaster or a slow motion revolution. I'm not sure which.
Well, let me talk about another major infrastructure project. We mentioned it in the earlier segment, and that is high-speed rail.
Right.
What is the short-term and long-term prospects for high-speed rail?
Well, as we all know, Gavin Newsom kind of backed away from the project, more or less, kind of, sort of, somewhat.
Yes, I did. No, I didn't.
He said it's too expensive and the timeline doesn't work. And then he said he wants to finish the line in the San Joaquin Valley and extend it south to Bakersfield, north to Merced, and make it a high-speed line. Well, good luck, because immediately the Trump administration said, in that case, we want our $3.5 billion back because you're not really building a statewide system, and so they're fighting over that. Probably the current project, which runs from around Chowchilla to Shafter.
Okay, Shafter. But they're supposed to extend it to Bakersfield.
Well,
sorry, you got me there.
If Bakersfield allows them to extend it.
Right. Well, here's the other thing. They're also talking about extending it to Merced, and that would connect to the ACE train, which would take you over to San Jose, and the CalTrain up to the peninsula. So you would have an improved passenger rail system.
If the ACE train is extended.
Well, they have the money for that, right? They have the $400 million to connect it from Modesto to Merced.
Yeah, so.
Maybe you should have said, hey, it's a better connection for passenger rail.
Maybe that's what it turns out to be. And of course, the current line that's being built could be used for Amtrak service.
Right.
Because remember, it's not electrified as it stands, and so, you know, who knows. But clearly, Gavin Newsom is not the fan of this thing that Jerry Brown was, and so there's that. Same thing with the tunnels. He says maybe one tunnel, but maybe one tunnel really doesn't work because it may not be worth boring only one tunnel, and who knows. So those things are very much up in the air. His school finance thing, Jerry Brown's school finance thing, very much up in the air. It's supposed to help poor and non-English speaking kids catch up with all the other kids, but so far they aren't. Pension reform got validated by the state Supreme Court.
Let me ask you about that. I wanted to ask you about pension reform. It seems to me that the court's going to play a huge role here in determining whether or not Jerry Brown has a positive legacy on pension reform.
Right.
Would you agree? And the cases that are going through the courts right now, it seems like they're nibbling at the edges. They don't want to take on the California rule, which says that basically if you promise someone a benefit when they're hired, you can't change it unless you replace it with an equal benefit. They're kind of nibbling away at that?
They're not nibbling away so far at the California rule. In fact, they very distinctly in their first decision on these cases said, we're not going to touch the California rule yet. You know, we don't get there yet.
Well, they like incremental change, right? They don't want this drastic change.
Well, it's hard to avoid the California rule. It either is or it isn't, and it may be the only way they can actually eventually solve the pension problem, because the condition of the pension, the big statewide pension funds themselves, is not getting any better, and another recession would just probably a knockout blow on them. They're struggling. They're struggling to.
They never recovered from the Great Recession.
Never recovered from the Great Recession, and they're hitting local governments hard for more money. I mean, a lot more money, like double in the last 8 years or so. And even so, they still can't get more than about 65–70% funded, and that doesn't cut it. And you know, so it's an immense problem. And if they fall much lower in terms of their fundedness, if that's a word, they get the point of no recovery. They can never get there.
Maybe one of the solutions is that a lot of these contracts are negotiated by unions who represent existing employees, not pensioners, and maybe they go and cut a new deal on pensions. Who knows? I'll just leave that out there.
Oh, it's like water. It's many moving parts.
We know the California's economy, though, is generating billions of dollars in extra money, at least now. But there are a lot of proposals being discussed in Sacramento that even with this extra money won't be able to necessarily pay for. So what are the priorities? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. Well, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom and the legislative Democrats have proposed lots of things. Guaranteed health care for all, a Marshall Plan for affordable housing, a master plan for aging with dignity, a cradle to college promise for the next generation, an all-hands approach to ending child poverty. Lots of things. But what are the top priorities for 2019? We're talking to veteran observer of state politics Dan Walters of CALmatters. So the governor proposes his initial budget. He seems to be channeling Jerry Brown in some ways. He's talking about budget resiliency. Was that kind of surprising coming from what some folks thought of as a traditional Bay Area liberal?
It was a little surprising because he had made all these promises during the campaign, a laundry list of very specific proposals. He was going to build 3.5 million housing units. He was going to do this and that. But he started backing away from it last year. Once he knew he was going to be governor, he kind of started backing away, kind of edging away from it a little bit. And now it's kind of in full, not exactly a retreat, kind of a sidestep movement of say, well, yeah, we want to do all these things and we're going to spend a little money on some of these things, but we can't afford the full bore this, that, or the other, and so we have to do what we can do. And you know, it's kind of a
isn't that kind of thing that you hear this thing? It was campaigning in poetry and governing in prose,
something like that. Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, so his budget did kind of channel Jerry Brown. He didn't go crazy on all these entitlements that he was talking about during the campaign, like health care and child care and early childhood education. He gave him a few bucks, but he didn't commit the state to a big number going forward. And he did put more money into reserve. He did pay down some debts. He did put some one-time expenditures. You know, that was pretty much a Jerry Brown type budget. And because he knows, as everybody else does, that sooner or later we're probably going to have a recession and things are going to get dicey. And he doesn't want to be out there on a limb with an enormous deficit and leave behind something like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay, I'm going to cite you back to you again. You've written that, quote, the first big issue likely to emerge is early childhood education, part of Newsom's cradle to college promise. Okay, so what's going to happen there?
Well, he's offering some money, but it's one-time money to, as he calls it, set up the infrastructure for early childhood education. But it doesn't
creating a committee.
Doesn't commit it to a long-term new entitlement of universal pre-K services, the way the advocates want, and the way he kind of hinted he was going to do. So it's a typical kind of down payment. Watch that. And if he goes crazy on this stuff, he's going to get bitten when we have a recession, and he knows that, and he doesn't want that to happen. So he's trying to be prudent with that. But sooner or later, the people who supported him because he promised all these things are going to say, well, show me the money.
Well, California leads the nation in poverty, right? And one of the reasons for that is the high housing prices. So, and housing's been on the agenda for a while. What's going to happen in 2019 in housing?
He is engaged in housing, and Jerry Brown kind of ducked the issue, to tell you the truth. But Gavin Newsom is engaged. He's threatening local governments that don't meet their quota of zoning land for housing with loss of transportation money. He's already sued one city, and they've named 47 other cities as potential targets.
It kind of sounds like a traditional carrot and stick approach. You give me some money for housing, but then also a stick. If you don't get off the NIMBY thing, we're going to hit you.
But as I pointed out in a recent column, there's an Achilles heel to all that. Even if a city zones enough land for housing, that doesn't build the housing. And building the housing is dependent on private investment for the most part, because the government doesn't have enough money to do it. Private investment, and you can't force people to build. And as I pointed out, there's also another problem. Even the places that have zoned property, and even the places that have projects ready to go, permitted and everything else, they're not building them because they can't get the carpenters and the electricians and the plumbers to build them. We have an enormous shortage of blue-collar labor in California, and that could turn out to be, so between the can't force people to build and can't build because of lack of labor, those could be huge, huge impediments.
And then maybe if we go into another recession, how do you hit the targets?
How do you hit the target?
And the numbers are talking about, are pretty extreme. And we're talking about, I think the average last year was 116,000 units. He wants quite a bit more than that being built.
You would have to double that to get to his, and at least you need to get to probably up to 200,000. Now 200,000 is presumably doable because we were there before. Back in the last decade, we got up to 200,000. In fact, we overbuilt a little bit.
I actually found the 64-year average, if you care to know, is 165,000 units.
Right.
So we're,
That's doable, but that gets you, that allows you to tread water on population growth and work into the shortage a little bit and make up for the housing that's lost to fire and all that kind of stuff. So that's a kind of a minimal things to get to 200,000, but we're a long ways from even 200,000.
Okay. Well, up next, we're going to talk, we haven't talked much about the Republicans. There may be a reason for that given how they performed in the November election. What's happening to the California Republican Party, and can they find their way out of the political wilderness? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. No doubt about it, the midterms dealt an already reeling California Republican Party more setbacks. Democrats won super majorities in both houses of the California legislature and won every statewide office for the third election cycle in a row. What is it going to take for the California Republican Party to be relevant in the state again? One of the issues here in the midterms was the voter turnout. And frankly, older white males had less influence than young ethnic voters. And it looks like the demographics of California and the voters of California are starting to now match up a little more closely. What does that mean for the California Republican Party?
Well, it doesn't mean anything good unless they change their tune quite a bit. Look, Donald Trump was a huge drag on the Republicans this year. They didn't need that. That's like they were already wounded, and this was the coup de grace in a way to have Trump.
Seems like every Democrat was running against Donald Trump.
Every Democrat was running against Trump, and Trump is very unpopular in California. It is. And so, the new effort, I guess you'd say, is among Republicans is to try to distance themselves, at least the state party, distance themselves from Donald Trump. They have a new party chair who's young, Latina, from the suburbs. And
a mother of two.
That kind of hits all the buttons that have been missing the Republicans lately. You have the young, the women, the suburban, and so forth. So it's an optics thing, obviously, and it takes a lot more than optics. But
I might want to ask you about that, though, because part of her team, the new chair of the California Republican Party, she has executive officers. One is a Taiwanese American immigrant. Another is a person who's gay. Not going to make a difference?
It's all optics. I don't think it changes any voters. It gives them a chance to remake themselves, maybe. But I think if there's hope for the Republicans, remember, a generation ago, the Republicans were doing very well in California. 94
governorships back to back.
If there's a hope there, is that the the Democrats have not done particularly well. I can remember back in the 70s when Democrats had 57% of the registered voters. Now they're down 43, 44%. Right. And yes, the Republicans are down in the
20s,
below the Mendoza line, down in the mid-20s. But the fact is that the growth of voting in California has been mostly by people who are not aligned with either party. And so that makes the Democrats vulnerable in the sense that if they do something that kind of alienates those non-aligned voters
they can overreach.
They could overreach. If they go crazy and start raising all the taxes, tax everything that walks or talks, they could overreach.
But,
and there are people in the party who would like to do that.
Yeah, but the Democrats are not a monolithic party, right? You've got the Valley Democrats, who are very different than the Bay Area Democrats.
Very different.
Right?
And very different from the Southern California Democrats as well. Yeah, it's not a monolithic party. In fact, that's what happens when a party becomes dominant. It kind of starts breaking up into factions, and we're seeing that already with the Democrats. That said, the Republicans have a long way to go to gain relevance again in California, and I think my guess is as long as Donald Trump is president, they're not going to gain relevance, and they are kind of just out of touch with what California is today, and it's very difficult for them to get back in touch.
Well, let me ask you, maybe in the short term, are the 2020 propositions the only real chance that California Republicans have to really effectuate public policy? They need to focus on the propositions in 2020 as opposed to changing the legislature?
It wouldn't be the Republicans doing it. You might see more conservative interest groups try to use the ballot in 2020, and it might help the Republicans, it might help turnout. Listen, I don't think the Republicans have hit bottom in California. You had a turnout, about 65% turnout in this election, which was
considered... They're in the low 20s in terms of registration.
65 voter turnout.
Okay.
Yeah, 65% voter turnout for all the electorate.
Right.
That was 20 points higher than it was 4 years ago.
And it's going to be higher in
but
the 2020.
It's going to be another 10 points higher probably in 2020.
Right.
And there are at least 2 more congressional seats. Remember, they whacked the Republican delegation in half from 14 to 7.
Right. Every close seat went to the Democrats.
Every close seat went to the Democrats, and there's a possibility that they could get a couple more, I think, in 2020. There are a couple of... They're
already targeting some seats, the Democrats.
They're already starting, Republicans who kind of barely made it, don't have good voter registration and so forth. I think there's a couple of seats that could go.
Okay, only got 30 seconds, but I want to ask you this question to fit this in. I'm wondering if both parties are in trouble. When you looked at motor voter, the registration, 52% registered as no party preference, independent. That's normally 33%. Is that just a one-off or is that a trend?
No, it is a trend. I mean, the non-aligned, historically, the independent voters and the minor party voters have been about 10% of the electorate. Now we're up to well over 25% and growing. So they are going to be an ever bigger factor. It's one of the reasons why the Democrats haven't been growing either. The Republicans have been shrinking, the Democrats haven't been growing. The big growth has been in the non-aligned voters. And those voters are potentially up for grabs going forward. And particularly when some of the more recent immigrant groups become in the second and third and fourth generations, there's a tendency to become, maybe they become homeowners, entrepreneurs, and that sort of thing. And they tend to be, maybe move a little bit more conservative.
So I guess we're going to see. Stay tuned, I guess the answer is. I want to thank Dan Waltz from CalMatters for joining us. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Institute. Thanks for joining us.